plague came and attacked the vegetation, the food supply of Egypt, that was more intense than having your cupboard cleaned out by the youth group on a Saturday night. I mean, those locusts really knew what they were doing. And it was, of course, as I mentioned, the 8th plague. And every one of these plagues, of course, are part of the great smackdown that is occurring between the God of Israel, the God of the Hebrews, and the multiple gods, 80 in all, the gods of Egypt. There they are, Egyptian gods on parade. You remember the order of the plagues. By this time, you should be able to teach this yourselves. The plagues are divided into sets of 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, with a 10th plague as the grand finale. And each one of these sets of plagues is ordered in a particular way. They all have the same order. Plagues 1 and 2, 4 and 5, 7 and 8, the first 2 of each set of 3 is introduced with a warning, of which the first in each one of those warnings, for each one of these sets of plagues, is a warning in the morning. And then plague 3, 6, 9, we're going to see 9 today, will arrive without warning. So that's the order of the plagues. They are divinely ordered and structured. And speaking of divine, there are purposes. There are 4 divine purposes of the plagues. The first is to compel Pharaoh to release the Hebrews. The second is for the Egyptians to receive justice. Indeed, what is going to occur, what has occurred, and will occur in multiple spades by the end of the series of plagues, based upon the retributive justice that is promised in Genesis 12, verse 3. I will bless those who bless you, the ones who curse you, I will curse. The Egyptians will receive recompense for how they treated the people of Israel, God's people. The third reason, it is a demonstration of God's power and authority. And how? And the final reason is a demonstration of the Lord's superiority over Egypt's gods, which we've seen one after another, 8 plagues in. We'll see 9th plague today and introduce the 10th one as well. So, getting right to the text, right into the text. Plague number 9. Not a lot of time, not a lot of literary real estate spent on plague number 9, and that also is because it goes by very, very quickly. It's just a 3-day plague. So it goes by chronologically quickly. A lot of literary space is not spent on it because, frankly, in the darkness, not much to do. So let's see how the text unfolds. This is the one that occurs, no warning, remember. The final plague of the 3 sets. The only thing that's left after this plague is the grand finale. Then the Lord, and again, that's the covenant name of God. That's the name that Pharaoh invoked last week in our session last time. Pharaoh invoked a couple of occasions the covenant name of God, Jehovah, Adonai, the Lord, capital O-R, L-O-R-D. And the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward the sky, that there may be a darkness over the land of Egypt, even a darkness which may be felt. This thick darkness that is coming over Egypt is described as a tangible darkness, a tangible darkness. And so commentators, teachers of the word have tried to make sense, rabbis have tried to make sense of what could this possibly mean? What do you mean a darkness that could be felt? Is it that the darkness is so intense it's as if our sense of touch, since we have been deprived of a sense of sight, that our other senses then are heightened, and so our sense of touch is engaged by the thickness, this murky darkness? Is it because of natural occurrences, because of the tremendous devastation of the land over the previous number of months and how the land has been devastated, that the normal winds that come in March now pick up a huge amount of sediment through the land, through the region, and that sediment blots out the sky, and what you're feeling is the grittiness. You can't see the sun, there's no light, and all you can feel is the grittiness of the red earth that has been the decimated dry earth that is all around you, floating in the air. Don't know. And I don't need to know. All I know is that it is going to be such a thick darkness that one sense is going to be wiped out, another will somehow be engaged. So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky. And it's an interesting phrase, because with Moses stretching out his hand, that's exactly what the Egyptians are going to be doing for 3 days in the dark. I have a hard enough time. I don't know about you. My wife insists on darkness in the bedrooms. I don't know how your bedrooms are set up, but it's dark. And so if I have to get up in the middle of the night, I literally have to slowly step by step, literally inch by inch, or I might step on something, bump into something, who knows, on my way wherever I'm going and then back again. But this is darkness. And as he stretched out his hand, 3 days of dark. You're not left in suspense as to how long this darkness is going to last, how long this plague is going to last. It tells you. Now, again, whether or not this darkness is because of a blinding sandstorm or something, you've always have your scholars who are trying to describe these events from a naturalistic, scientific perspective. But that naturalistic scientific perspective never takes into account that the plagues begin at the discretion of Moses, right? Moses times it perfectly so that he stretches out his hand and darkness descends. Or, of course, what we'll see in the text, the continued distinction that God continues to make between the residences of Egypt, of the Egyptians, and the little village of Goshen, where the Hebrew slaves are. The entire nation is suffering in pitch blackness, but the Hebrews in Goshen retain the sunlight. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the sons of Israel had light in their dwellings. You know, if you think about that, if the Egyptians, this would have included, of course, the taskmasters as well. If the Egyptians could not see one another, nor could anyone really even see to get out of bed, to get out of your place of safety, wherever you've parked yourself for 3 days, that means that no taskmasters are showing up for work. And if no taskmasters or overseers are coming to work, that means that the Hebrews, who continue to have light, they actually get 3 days off. They get a vacation built in. We're very nice. Nobody thinks about that, but yes, it's not like the Hebrews said, hey, we have light. Let's whistle while we work, and, hi-ho, off to work we go. Not at all. Right? The Egyptians are paralyzed by the lack of sensual sensual input. Right? Now, the chief Egyptian deity, remember all of these plagues challenge at least one, usually several, Egyptian deities. And this time it is Pharaoh's own divine father, quote unquote, Ra, who is the sun god. There he is with the sun over his head. He's got the sun in the morning and the moon at night. No, he's got nothing. He's got darkness this time out, right? Even though the picture has him with the sun. He's the sun god. He is the high god of the Egyptian pantheon. So God, to this point, been taking out second, third tier gods, little lieutenant gods and assistant gods and vice gods, But now he aimed to the highest, to the high god of the Egyptian pantheon, Pharaoh's own daddy, Ra. And this is surely a response to last week's statement by Pharaoh, where he said, Ra is before you. Right? Ra is, your God is powerful, but don't forget that he's not more powerful than our big gun. You can take out the little guns, but not the big gun, Ra. Just warning you, Moses, don't mess with Ra. Well, Ra's been messed with impunity. And not only Ra, but we've seen these guys, Shu and Nut, the respective sky god and goddess, would have been shown yet again to be impotent before Jehovah, before Adonai, before the covenant God of the Hebrews. So what are we going to do? Pharaoh calls to Moses, got on the telephone. Oh, there's no telephone, right? Well, how did he call to Moses? From his throne room? How did Moses sit? Somehow had his servants, maybe he himself crawled out of his bed, away from his throne. Who knows? Right? Made their way toward the light in Goshen. Got a message to Goshen. Called to Moses and said, okay, I give. Go serve the Lord. It's a very generous offer I'm going to make for you. All right? It's a very generous, but I'm going to give a little, you got to give a little, right? You got to give to get. So we're going to have a compromise here. Another generous offer. Go serve the Lord. Only let your flocks and your herds be detained. Even your little ones may go with you. That, Moses, is the kind of king that I am. Magnanimous, generous. In the past, yes, I have given you a hard time about bringing everybody, bringing how long you can go to worship. But listen, you may go worship. And remember, that's all that's on the table. Here we are 9 plagues in, and the liberation of an entire people group from enslavement has never been on the table. It was not what was asked for. By design, God simply said, ask a minimal request. Let my people go to the border of Egypt for a 3-day worship service. Couple days travel, couple days back, 2 weeks tops. Let them worship the Lord. That's the simple request. No, let my people go because slavery is so bad, and no population should enslave it. There's no statement like that to this point in the text. A simple request. Let the Lord's people worship their Lord. Simple equation. And so Pharaoh said, okay, you know what? I can get behind that. You may go worship the Lord. Go serve him. Your covenant name of God. Again, remember, this is the God that Pharaoh, at the beginning of the encounter, chapters back, said, I do not know this God. Well, now he not only knows him, he knows him by name. He recognizes the covenant God of the Hebrews by name. He says, go and worship him. One compromise from you, however, I need a little collateral. Let your flocks and your herds be detained. And I'll let if you do that, even your kids can go. Look, that's the kind of guy I am. Well, the response is this. But Moses said, you must also let us have sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice them to the Lord our God. Your offer, Pharaoh, is objectionable. And let me tell you just how objectionable it is. Let me tell you what a non-starter this offer is. You better let us bring all our animals. Not one hoof shall be left behind. Remember, God had not yet revealed to Moses just which and how many animals he wanted sacrificed to him. And his people, once they got to the place of worship, they couldn't afford to be brought up short because they didn't have the right animals or the right quantity of animals to sacrifice. Therefore, our livestock, too, shall go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind. So, in other words, the Hebrews are going to be hoofing it. Not a hoof shall be left behind, for we shall take some of them to serve the Lord our God. Until we arrive there, we ourselves do not know with what we shall serve the Lord. So thanks for the offer of all of us going, kids included, but we got to have livestock, or else there's no point. There's no way to worship the Lord without livestock, because he desires blood sacrifice, animal sacrifice. But, verse 27, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. Once again, the backbone of Pharaoh was strengthened. See, Pharaoh, over 9 plagues, you see his will beginning to buckle. You see he's giving in to that which he wouldn't normally want to do. Because of the pressure that the Lord has brought to bear in these plagues, and each time either the Lord himself or Pharaoh himself strengthens his backbone. It's a better translation, I think, than hardening Pharaoh's heart. In other words, strengthened resolve. Strengthened Pharaoh's resolve, so that he would be now not willing to buckle under pressure anymore. And so that would explain why Pharaoh has this crazy bifurcated personality. I'll let you go, kind of, but no, I take it back, right? Now, if Moses had only known, right, the rule that once somebody says something and you cry out, no takebacks, that it sticks, if only Moses had known that, maybe they would have been able to go worship. But Pharaoh continually takes it back. The Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was not willing to let them go. He rescinds the offer. And the king is going to now expel Moses and Aaron from his presence, and he's going to forbid any future return. Pharaoh said to them, "Get away from me," which I think if you take the Hebrew more colloquially, "Get off my case." It's probably more accurate. Get off my case. Get away from me. And beware. Do not see my face again. For in the day you see my face, you shall die. Capital consequence for any infraction for Moses, for Aaron, to enter into the presence of the Lord again. Well, they actually are going to see each other again, but just for the sole purpose of Pharaoh's humiliating admission of defeat before the Lord in later on, chapter 12. But further details of this dialogue, the dialogue doesn't stop here. Further details of the dialogue are provided in the next couple of verses. This is just, in a sense, a summary statement, and then we get to some of the nitty-gritty of more conversation. But you get the big picture right here in verse 29. Moses said, "You're right. I shall never see your face again." Kind of. Let's continue to the next chapter. We're in these first 10 verses, and that's as far as we're going. We see not the 10th plague, but we see the warning of the grand finale. The grand finale, remember, doesn't follow the rules of the 3 sets of 3 that we've studied for weeks now. 10th plague comes with its own very special warning. And these 3 verses that we're going to see form a parenthesis to the preceding conversation. So it's like taking that conversation, putting a parenthesis, the narrator saying, and by the way, right, for these 3 verses. So let's take a look. Now, the Lord said to Moses. So conversation between Pharaoh and Moses interrupted for the reader right now because you've got this parenthetical discussion that brings us up to speed with what the Lord has revealed to Moses. The Lord said to Moses, one more plague, one more, I will bring on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here. And when he lets you go, he will surely drive you out of here completely. So this provides the background information the reader needs. Remember previously, the Lord had promised Moses, this is way back at the burning bush, when Moses first was coming to Egypt. The Lord had promised that following the 10th and following plague, not only would Pharaoh let the Hebrews leave Egypt for this little temporary worship sojourn, 2 weeks. No, you're going to get more than that. After this one, he's going to passionately and permanently drive you out of Egypt. And Moses, well, look what Moses is commanded by God. Speak now in the hearing of the people that each man, that's the Israelis, that's the Israelites, the Hebrews. Speak now in the hearing of the people that each man ask of his neighbor and each woman from her neighbor for articles of silver and articles of gold. And the Lord gave the people, the Israelites, the Hebrews, favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Respect. Certain level of, you can understandable awe, favor. Furthermore, the man Moses himself was greatly esteemed in the land of Egypt, both in the sight of Pharaoh's servants and in the sight of the people. Then and now, the people of the Middle East, as just a general characteristic, are impressed by strength. And there's a phrase for this, the strong horse. And the quote-unquote Arab street or the Middle Eastern street will invariably back what's called the strong horse. A demonstration of strength is respected. And that's exactly, there's no stronger horse in all of Egypt, the entire Middle East, than Moses himself. And he has got the respect of Pharaoh's servants and the people of Egypt. No longer, not only Moses, by this time the Hebrews are no longer loathed as the slaves they've been, no longer reviled as the slaves they've been, but they are now highly respected as the people of this oh so powerful covenant God of theirs, this Jehovah, this Adonai. And Moses' reputation, most dramatically, has been rehabilitated in the sight of the Hebrews. Remember when Moses comes back, Moses flees, actually, first of all, remember, because some Hebrew says to him, who made you judge over us, right? And were you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? You're going to kill us? Moses flees because he's got no respect from his people. Comes back, people get excited. They hear about the bricks, making bricks without straw, having to scrounge their own straw up, doubling their labors. And Moses' reputation plummets in the eyes of the Hebrews. By this time, his reputation has been completely rehabilitated in the eyes of the Jewish people, and the ones who previously questioned his leadership way back in chapters 2 and chapter 5, well, finally, at last, they now revere him as their deliverer. Now, verse 4 picks up the preceding conversation between Pharaoh and Moses, where Pharaoh says, "You will not see me again." And Moses says, "You're darn right, I will not see you again. I'm out of here." So Moses says, this is the last thing that Moses says. But the reader needed to be clued in to the dialogue that Moses had with the Lord before Moses lays this out on Pharaoh, lest you think that this is Moses' idea. It's not. It's very important that the one who bears the responsibility for the 10th plague is not Moses, and it's not the Hebrews. It's God himself. Moses said, "Thus says the Lord," about midnight. "I am going out into the midst of Egypt." What's different about this plague warning? There's no ultimatum here. There's no do this or you're going to get this. No ultimatums. And the reason is God is not going to relent from this. This is set. God is not going to stay his hand. God is not going to exercise mercy under any circumstances. Feel the weight of this pronouncement. The decree by God is announced, and the fate of the Egyptians is sealed. About midnight, I will go out. The Lord himself, the covenant God, will personally descend into the midst of Egypt. What's going to happen? "And all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of the Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstones, all the firstborn of the cattle as well. Every firstborn son of the Egyptians will die." And that's from the royal court of Pharaoh extending to even the most humble village and hamlet. In addition, firstborn of animals also to be killed. The Egyptian deities to be challenged by this final plague. Isis, the goddess of reproduction, the ostensible protector of Egyptian children. Min, the reproduction god. Ra, we just talked about him, the divine father of every past and the present and every future Pharaoh. And in this instance, Pharaoh himself, who is considered the divine incarnation of the falcon-headed god Horus. With this plague, this 10th plague, any pretense of the king's divinity would be forever shattered. The Egyptian king will definitively be shown to be powerless before the covenant God of Israel. Moreover, there shall be a great cry in all the land of Egypt, such as there has not been before and such as shall never be again. The plague will be the culmination of all those plagues preceding it and will result in the emotional devastation of the population. The outpouring of mourning throughout Egypt, it will be unprecedented. Never again in Egypt's history would that nation experience an equal level of intense tragedy. But against any of the sons of Israel, a dog will not even bark, whether against man or beast, that you may understand how the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. Again, the Lord is highlighting the stark distinction that he makes between the Egyptians and his chosen people, Israel, Israel will not be subject to such horror. Egypt had already subjected the Hebrews to the horror of losing their children in the genocide that occurred at the beginning of the book of Exodus. The children drowned in the river. All these servants, all these, your servants, speaking to Pharaoh, will come down to me and bow themselves before me, saying, go out, you and all the people who follow you, and after that I will go out. There's coming a time, shortly, when Pharaoh's own servants will bow down before Moses and plead for the Hebrews to leave Egypt. Well, you'll remember that the previous chapter ends with Moses being expelled from Pharaoh's presence. And so Moses went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. He's got nothing more to say to this suicidally hardened king. And so he leaves the court in great anger. Not because Pharaoh threw him out, but because he's brought his people to this level of devastation. This brings no joy to Moses. It brings no joy to the Jewish people. Hey, yay, we get a pass. Our firstborn doesn't die. You know, at our Passover Seders, we have 4 cups. Right? And wine, fruit of the vine, it represents joy in Jewish culture. And so we drink 4 cups, cups of deliverance and sanctification and redemption. But that second cup, the cup of deliverance, we actually don't drink the whole cup. We diminish that cup by 10 drops, either using our pinky and spilling a drop out, or just literally drip dropping 10 drops out, 1 for each plague, because our joy cannot be complete based upon the tremendous, unprecedented suffering of the Egyptians. And so Moses is upset. He's angry. And he leaves Pharaoh's presence in hot anger. And the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, so that my wonders will be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh. Yet the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the sons of Israel go out of the land. So that's a summary statement of the entire preceding plagues narrative. All 3 sets of 3, all 9 plagues. And the Lord encouraged Moses, saying, listen, it is my divine purpose for Pharaoh's backbone to be strengthened, for his heart to be hardened, and the king will stubbornly refuse to grant Moses' request. And this refusal is because the Lord wanted his power to be spectacularly displayed throughout the land of Egypt. By the time the next chapter is over, it will most assuredly be mission accomplished. If there are any questions about whether it's mission accomplished at the end of the next chapter, by the end of 2 more chapters, all doubt will be removed with the closing of the sea. This is where the narrative gets literally deadly serious. This is not a myth. This is not a story that the Jewish people tell one another to provide an answer for where do we come from and how did we start as a people. This is history. The book of Exodus records the historical narrative of the Jewish people in their formative years as they go from being a free and independent set of migrants invited into a country not their own, to their becoming enslaved by the same people who had originally invited them to come in, to undergoing a genocide of their children by the leaders and the people, to centuries of slavery, and now the cusp of liberation. Many of us have lived for decades as slaves, not to Egypt, but to our own proclivities to fall short of God's standards of morality, honor, and excellence to which He calls us. The great news for us, as just as the Hebrews were liberated by the strong and mighty outstretched hand of our God, so too anyone today, Jewish or Gentile, who is enslaved to their own inabilities to live a life pleasing to God, we can be liberated as well by the strong and outreached hand. Well, in this instance, hands of our God, who has sent His Son to be sacrificed on our behalf so that each one of us can serve not Satan, not culture, not humanity, but we can serve our Creator. If you are interested in making that decision today, then I want you to see me afterwards. And if not me, then I want you to see any of the other leaders or prayer leaders down here in the front. Tell them that you're ready to make a decision to say yes to the Lord. That you're throwing off the shackles of bondage. And you want to be liberated. I mean, Christianity, following the Messiah, this is not a trap. This is not a cage. Do I look like I'm caged? I am unchained, and so are you, through the power of our Messiah. That's right. Yes. And for those of you, most of you have already made that decision. You're already following the Messiah. And well, some of us, let's be honest, there are moments in our faith walk where we are walking a little less consistently than at other times. Okay, and for those of you who fall into that category, I suggest you straighten up and fly right. Right, but you can't do that alone. Ask for prayer. Right, you have look around, left, right, back, front. You've got people all around you, and we're all willing to pray and stand in the gap with you. Say, I cannot get my act together. I need the Lord's help. Will you stand with me? And we all say, yes, we are a community, and we stand together. Right? We help one another. We bear one another's burdens. Well, all right, I'm afraid I'm over time, and we're going to have to pause for right now.